We'll get reaction out of Australia shortly with Sarah Clarke, but we're starting in Washington, D.C. with Mike Hanna. Mike, what's happening now in court then, as far as we know?
Well, it's very difficult to understand that. The court is a long way away in the North Pacific, in the Northern Mariana Islands. There have been some reports out of the court saying that they are waiting for proceedings to start. But I must add as well that no cameras are allowed in the court. Very rare for the proceedings in the federal court to be live streamed or indeed any photographs taken. So we're not going to know really what's happening in there until they walk out, having clinched basically what is a plea deal. Julian Assange has pleaded guilty to a single count of contravening the security legislation, and he will be sentenced to time served. This is in terms of an agreement reached between the Department of Justice and Assange's lawyers, and ends this lengthy saga in terms of Assange's ongoing detention.
And Mike, people may be forgiven for wondering why this particular US territory in the Pacific.
Well, it does appear that Assange throughout has attempted to evade any form of movement to the United States. So he has resisted attempts to come back or be in this country, fearing some type of imprisonment would follow here in the United States. It's one of the reasons why he sought refuge in an embassy in London, to avoid being moved to the United States. So the Department of Justice had an agreement with his lawyers now that instead of coming back to the United States, which Assange was really reluctant to do, they would hold these court proceedings in the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, this is a US territory, it is a federal court, and it is, from Assange's point of view, most convenient to get back home to Australia, because that is what he wants to do. Immediately these court proceedings are concluded, the plea bargain is agreed on, it is signed, he will be leaving the courtroom and proceeding directly back to his home in Australia for the first time in over some 15 years.
Mike Hanna, thanks for that. Let's cross live now to Brisbane, Australia, where Sarah Clarke is following developments for us there. Sarah, what's the reaction been to all of this in Australia, and what does the guilty plea that's expected mean for press freedom?
Well, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, is the one who's been leading the charge of late. He met with US President Joe Biden last October and publicly declared that this situation of incarceration had dragged on for too long, and regardless of people's opinions on Assange's activities, it was time to bring Assange home. Now, Assange's case has been a rare point of contention or friction between what is Australia and the United States, which is what normally is a tight relationship. But the reaction for Assange's return to Australia, possibly as early as this evening, to land in Canberra, has been one of elation for his family. They're over the moon, but they have stressed that they are concerned about his mental and physical health after being away from Australia for more than 14 years. And the legal saga, I should also state, is far from over. The points of contention over this plea deal have implications for, as you mentioned, press freedom. His lawyers didn't want to go down the path of having him plead guilty, and as a result, they'll no doubt be expecting to request, or we expect them to request, a plea deal. But as I mentioned, once this court appearance is over in Saipan, Assange will board a plane, we expect him to return to Australia's national capital. And we'll understand more about what this plea deal and what the agreement that's been struck between the United States and Australia once the court appearance is finished. But as I said, his journey to freedom and back to Australia starts today.
Sarah, thank you. Well, staying with this, Donald Rothwell is a professor of international law at the Australian National University. He joins us from Canberra. Welcome to the programme. Will this then be seen as a victory for Julian Assange, or can the US now say, look, we were right all along?
Look, I think today is a pretty significant day because it's the first time that Julian Assange has voluntarily appeared before a US court. And on the basis of what we know, he's about to enter into a plea deal, acknowledging that he is guilty with respect to the charge brought to him under the Espionage Act. On the other hand, it brings an end to this very long-running legal, political and diplomatic case, which in one way or another has extended back to 2010. And obviously that's an important resolution for Assange's situation. And quite remarkably, within the space of 24 or 36 hours, he might find himself back in Australia by the end of the day.
Well, indeed, long running, as you say. I mean, why has this, in your view, taken so long to be resolved?
Well, partly because Assange has fought every single legal proceeding that's been brought against him. We need to recall that this goes back to originally a Swedish arrest warrant that was issued in 2010 that he fought. That was the basis for him eventually entering the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012. And then, of course, the Trump administration formally brought charges against him under the Espionage Act, and the United States then formally sought his extradition from the United Kingdom. So there's an interplay of a series of legal issues here in Sweden and in the United States and in the United Kingdom, which has seen this span out over such a long time. And as I said, Assange has fought and contested every single step of those legal proceedings.
Will this definitely be the end of the matter, do you think? Can it ever be reopened?
No, I don't think it can be reopened, but I guess much remains to be seen in terms of what is next for Julian Assange, in terms of whether he actively engages as the editor and the head of Wikileaks. There are so many large global stories at the moment, which one would think that Wikileaks would have a strong interest in, especially involving the United States. So may we see him resume that particular prominent journalistic role, and that could bring him to the attention of the US authorities again.
You mentioned the US there. I mean, they'd said that the material that was released all those years ago put operatives at risk. Was there any merit in that argument?
Well, certainly there's a lot of strength to the way in which the US State Department and the Pentagon was very concerned about the release of some of that material. Certainly it shone a light on US options and activities and military actions and the global war on terror. But from a US perspective, they saw that US officials were very much placed in threat and in peril as a result of some of these actions. So there remain divided views quite clearly on that particular perspective, the US perspective and the Assange and the press freedom perspective that WikiLeaks has promoted.
You mentioned the press freedom there. I mean, during this time, what do you think this has meant for other websites and outlets when it comes to considering publishing material which perhaps many governments wouldn't want to be published?
Well, that's a great question. I think we need to reflect that WikiLeaks really came to prominence really 15 years ago, and the issues that we're talking about really have not changed ever since the release of much of that WikiLeaks material in and around 2010. We also need to recall that, of course, Donald Trump very famously praised WikiLeaks during the 2016 presidential election, and arguably some of the material that WikiLeaks released with respect to Hillary Clinton was important during that 2016 presidential election campaign. I'm not a media commentator or a journalist, so I can't really speak from inside the media, but no doubt the global attention that the WikiLeaks case and Assange's case has attracted will have inevitably caused some pause for the media and journalists more generally. But on the other hand, these concessions made by the United States will be seen as a very positive step.
Donald Rothwell, we very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.